Hi, Jessica. So I received your message and your request to go over simple tricks that I use to learn the distribution for the major nerve injuries for the radial, ulnar, and the medial nerve injury, as well as its main deficits. Now, I know you're taking your exam in just 4 days, your MBCOT exam. Congratulations. If you've made it this far, you are unstoppable. You'll do very well. You know more than you think you know. But I will do my best to break it down as much as I can. It won't be a comprehensive overview. It won't go over the anatomy or the mechanics of how these injuries occur, but I'm going to go over what I think might be the most important things to remember for the MBCOT exam. Let's start with the radial nerve injury. The radial nerve innervates the extensor supinator group of muscles of the forearm. You may or may not remember that, but that's okay. What I do want you to remember is that with the radial nerve injury, the clinical sign is at the wrist for a low lesion. Okay, so here's one trick that I use to remember the radial nerve injury. When you hear and think radial, think radiant. Radial, radiant kind of goes together, right? So radial and radiant bracelet. When you have a radial nerve injury, you will not be able to keep your radiant bracelet on because your wrist will drop. Bad demonstration. That should have fallen off for a dramatic effect. So wrist drop is the clinical sign that you will see with a radial nerve injury at the low level. And let's think about the occupational deficit. When you have a wrist drop, what might you have difficulty with? Manipulating objects and release of objects would also be difficult. Now, when you have a radial nerve injury at high lesion at the axilla, you will also have loss of triceps, so extending the elbow would also be impaired. For intervention, you would want to get your wrist back up, so a dynamic extension split to position your wrist in a slight extension and to protect the extensor tendons from being overstretched during healing and to position it in functional use would be important to consider for radial nerve injuries. Okay, let's talk about the ulnar nerve injury next. The ulnar nerve distribution is on the ulnar half of the ring finger and the pinky on both the palmar as well as the dorsal side. And so the clinical sign for an ulnar nerve injury is hyperextension of the metacarpophalangeal joint here. So hyperextension and flexion of the interphalangeal joints. So what do you get when you have hyperextension of MCP joint and flexion of the IP joints? You will get, ow, that hurts, what looks like a claw hand. Now, if you forget where the distribution of ulnar nerve is, I want you to associate the word ulnar with ultimate. So that's the trick that I used. What does ultimate means? It means last, final, right? So the last two fingers of your hand is where the ulnar nerve distribution is. Ulnar fingers. Hyperextension of MCP joint and flexion of IP joint. What is a main occupational deficit when you have an ulnar nerve injury? Let me demonstrate. Take an object and try to grab it with just these three fingers without using your ulnar fingers, the pinky and the ring finger. You will notice that your grip is not as strong as when you use all your 5 fingers. We don't realize this when we grab objects every day, but our power grip actually comes, most of it, from these 2 last fingers, the ultimate ulnar fingers, as I call them. Okay, so loss of power grip is what you need to remember for ulnar nerve injury. Also, there will be decreased pinch strength as well. What else? Intervention. So since your MCP joint is in hyperextension, for splinting consideration, you would want to consider something that would prevent the hyperextension of the MCP joint and place them in flexion instead. Finally, we're going to talk about the median nerve injury. So the distribution of the median nerve injury is on the palmar side, the thumb, index, middle, and the radial half of the ring finger. And on the dorsal side, you have the index, middle, and the radial half of the ring finger. Okay? So if you don't remember that exactly, just remember that for median nerve injury, it's everything from the middle finger and on. I mean, you do have that half of the ring finger, but when you look at the functional and the clinical side, it usually happens all right here with these first three fingers. Okay? Um, at low lesion, what you will have is the flattening of the thenar eminence here, and so you will have thumb adduction, and you will also have flexion of the index and the middle finger. So something like that. What does that look like? Ape hand. Low-level median nerve injury will result in what looks like an ape hand. Okay? And when you have a high lesion median nerve injury, you will have the hand of benediction. If you have a hard time remembering, one of the tricks that I use was the Pope prays to the high Almighty God and gives the hand of benediction for his blessings, right? So high lesion, high Almighty God, I sort of associate those two words together to remember that high lesion results in the hand of benediction here. So occupational deficits, you will not be able to oppose the thumb, so loss of thumb abduction, palmar abduction, and thumb opposition. So for a low lesion, median nerve injury, you would want to place the wrist in a 30-degree flexion, dorsal blocking splint. And if it's a high level injury, you would also involve the elbow at 90-degree flexion. And for other splinting consideration, you would want to consider the C-bar to maintain the web space and the opponent splint. So those are the tricks that I can share with you that helped me while I was taking the exam. Good luck. You have 4 days. Don't try to cram too much in at this point. Just review lightly, relax, and be confident, and know that you are well prepared and well equipped. You went to school for this and you learned a lot. You really do know much more than you think you know. So going in there with confidence and hope is really important. Okay? All right. See you next time.